When I saw my parents' lawyer's name on the envelope, I thought they wanted one last chance to humiliate me. I was wrong, because buried on the final page was the line that proved they had spent 2 years trying to erase the wrong daughter. For 2 years, my parents pretended I didn't exist, skipped my birthday, erased me from Christmas, and let the whole family believe I had walked away in shame. But the moment their lawyer mailed me a document demanding my signature on my grandfather's house, they made one mistake they never thought I'd catch. They sent it to the daughter he had quietly protected. My name is Amelia Mercer. I'm 32, and until everything exploded, people in Bath used to say I had the sort of parents anyone would be lucky to have. My father, Jonathan Mercer, had built Mercer & Rowe Property Group out of one cramped office above a travel agency near Queen Square and turned it into the kind of company that renovated Georgian townhouses, brokered restaurant leases, and sponsored every polished event that needed a respectable local businessman at the front of the room. My mother, Claire, knew how to make a dining table look like a magazine spread, and how to make a guest feel chosen with one hand while excluding someone else with the other. She sat on committees, chaired charity luncheons, organized the church, Christmas appeal, and remembered every useful birthday in the county. In public, they were generous, elegant, admired. In private, approval in our house worked like oxygen, invisible until someone decided you no longer deserved it. My younger sister, Sophie, learned early how to breathe easily in that atmosphere. She got the reassurance, the soft landings, the "don't worry, darling, we'll sort it." When she scraped her car on a stone wall, my father replaced it within a week. When she changed university courses twice, my mother called it finding herself. I was the older daughter, the reliable one, which sounds flattering until you realize it often means nobody thinks you need protecting. I got praise when I performed well, but it was the cool kind of praise that felt more like an invoice than affection. Even so, I loved them. I worked for it. I studied conservation architecture in Bristol, spent weekends helping my grandfather Arthur sand window frames at his narrow Honeystone house on Walcott Street, and believed that if I kept my head down, did good work, and embarrassed no one, I would eventually earn the warmth that seemed to come so naturally to Sophie. The beginning of the end looked ridiculously ordinary. It was a Sunday lunch in late October, rain ticking against the back windows, Claire laying roast lamb on platters as if she were hosting a royal inspection. My father had asked me there because Mercer & Rowe had won an option on a block of artisan workshops near the river, and they wanted my professional name attached to the heritage statement that would help them push the redevelopment through. On paper, it was elegant: mixed-use restoration, boutique retail, tasteful apartments above. In reality, they planned to strip out the interiors, price out 3 long-standing tenants, and keep just enough period brick for the brochure photographs. I had seen the survey pack. I knew what they were hiding. I told him no. Not quietly, not vaguely, and not in a way he could spin as indecision. I said I would not sign a report that disguised demolition as preservation, even for family. The room went still. Sophie stared at her plate. My mother's smile hardened like plaster. My father asked whether I understood what loyalty meant. I asked whether he understood what professional ethics meant. Claire called me self-righteous. Jonathan said I was confused about who had paid for my education and who had opened doors for me. When I refused to back down, he said something I can still hear with shocking clarity. "If you want to be separate from this family so badly, Amelia, then be separate." I left before dessert. By the next morning, the separation was official. My direct debit for the small allowance they still topped up while I finished a project contract disappeared. My mother stopped answering messages. My father's office told me he was unavailable. Sophie sent one careful text, "Maybe give it time," and then vanished into the family weather system like everyone else. Weeks became months. Christmas came and went without my name on a place card. My birthday passed with no call. Sophie got engaged at the Royal Crescent Hotel, and I found out because a cousin posted a carousel of champagne glasses and candlelight. People in Bath have a very polished way of pretending not to gossip, but I could feel the new version of me spreading through old circles: difficult daughter, dramatic daughter, ungrateful daughter, the one who turned her back on a good family over a work disagreement. Those 2 years were not dramatic in the movie sense. They were worse. They were practical, lonely, and slow. I moved from my airy flat in Clifton into a smaller place above a pharmacy in Redland because it was what I could afford alone. I learned which supermarket reduced soup after 8. I took the late train home from site visits and tried not to think about the fact that I could walk through an entire week without hearing my own surname spoken kindly by anyone who shared it. I doubted myself in petty moments and devastating ones. I lay awake replaying that lunch, wondering whether a softer tone, a smaller objection, a cleverer compromise could have saved me. But silence is clarifying when it lasts long enough. Somewhere in the middle of the first winter, with rain tapping a rust stain down my bedroom window and a broken radiator making the room smell faintly metallic, I realized I had spent most of my adult life treating acceptance like a promotion I might earn. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. I stopped performing reconciliation in my head and started building something actual. I took a night course in planning law in London twice a month and used the train journeys to mark up case files. My director at the Bristol studio where I worked, Helena Shaw, noticed I was better under pressure than anyone had given me credit for and began putting me in front of clients instead of behind drawings. A solicitor named Miriam Cole, who specialized in property disputes and had once restored a Victorian terrace herself, became the kind of blunt mentor every recovering people-pleaser needs. She told me to stop apologizing before making clear statements. She taught me how to read land registry entries properly, how covenants hide in plain sight, and how family businesses often mistake confidence for invincibility. I saved fiercely. I said yes to the unglamorous projects, yes to the Saturday consults, yes to the difficult council meetings nobody else wanted. I learned to live below my ego instead of below my means. I found friends who asked real questions and stayed for the honest answers. I saw a counselor every other Thursday in a room that smelled like orange tea and old books. And for the first time in my life, I said out loud that being the capable daughter had often meant being the emotionally abandoned one. I did not become louder. I became steadier. I did not post cryptic quotes or retaliate through relatives. I simply removed myself from the machine and got better outside it. By the second year, I was leading heritage assessments on projects that actually deserved saving. I had a promotion in view, 6 months of expenses in the bank, and a life whose structure no longer depended on whether Jonathan and Claire Mercer were pleased with me. Then the envelope came. Cream paper. London firm. My stomach recognized it. Before my brain did. I stood in my kitchen with one hand still on the kettle and opened it over the sink like it might leak poison. Their lawyer wrote in the polished, bloodless language professionals use when they want cruelty to look administrative. My grandfather's property on Walcott Street, including the house above the old print room and rear courtyard access, was being prepared for sale. As part of the estate regularization process, I was required to sign a deed of disclaimer and consent to transfer within 30 days. The wording made it sound procedural, inevitable, almost generous. But the more I read, the colder I got. They weren't asking for permission. They were trying to wipe me off the page. My grandfather's house was not just another asset. It was where he had taught me to measure old timber by smell, where he kept biscuit tins full of brass keys and postcards, where he had once told me, while repainting the sash window of the top-floor bedroom, "A building remembers who was careful with it." He died 8 months before the family lunch that ended everything, and I had been too shocked by grief and then by exile to understand how aggressively my parents had moved to consolidate what he left behind. Then I reached the deed schedule, and for a second I forgot how to breathe. Because the deed named me, not sentimentally, not vaguely. In black letters, cross-referenced to a codicil I had never seen, Arthur Mercer had granted me a right of first refusal if the property were ever sold outside of preservation use. And he had appointed an independent review of any transfer if a family dispute existed at the time of sale. He had known exactly who my parents were when money met legacy. He had also known exactly who I was. I called Miriam before I finished. The last page. She told me not to sign, not to reply emotionally, and not to speak to anyone in the family until we pulled every filed document connected to the estate. 48 hours later, we were sitting in her office under a framed map of Somerset while she highlighted 3 separate points that made my father's plan wobble. The codicil was valid, the sale notice was defective, and the proposed buyer intended luxury conversion, which triggered the protective clause immediately. My parents had either missed it or assumed I was too isolated, too underfunded, or too frightened to challenge them. That was their fatal miscalculation. They had built their whole strategy on an outdated version of me. What happened next was not explosive, it was better, it was precise. Miriam sent a response that was firm enough to stop the transfer and careful. enough to sound unimpeachable if it circulated, which in Bath these things always do. I exercised my right to first refusal. I presented financing terms. I requested full estate accounting. I asked for records of improvements, valuation methodology, and correspondence with the developer who had already been shown through the property before I was even contacted. At the same time, Helena, who had spent a year watching me grow, steel under the skin, brought me onto a restoration bid for a listed Assembly Rooms annex in Bristol, and when we won it, I was promoted to associate director. My name went on the announcement, then on the client brief, then into conversations my parents could not control. The family story began to change without me lifting a finger to change it. Relatives who had been politely absent started phoning to check in. Old family friends suddenly remembered how close I had been to Arthur. A neighbor from Walcott Street emailed photographs of the work I used to do with him as a teenager, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, standing in sawdust. Like I belonged there. For years, my parents had curated status through rooms, guests, donations, and whispered opinion. I was building mine through records, work, and evidence, and it turned out that foundation was much harder to shake. The final turn came 6 weeks. Later, when the independent review confirmed what we already suspected, Arthur's intention had been to keep the property protected or to let me acquire it if the family tried to liquidate it carelessly. I used my savings, a professional loan, and a small investment from a heritage fund Helena helped me approach, and I bought the house under the clause my parents had tried to bury. Not for sentiment alone, for purpose. I restored the upper floors into a design archive and mentorship space for young women entering conservation and property law, and I kept the print room at street level as a public studio named Arthur House. On opening night, the place glowed through the front windows exactly as it had when my grandfather worked late, except this time my name was on the brass plate beside the door. My father did not come inside, but several people from his world did, and I watched their expressions shift as they realized the woman they had once spoken about in lowered voices now stood at the center of a room built on competence, not permission. My mother sent flowers without a card, which was somehow more revealing than a card would have been. Sophie appeared quietly near the end of the evening, looked around, and said, almost in disbelief, "He would have loved this." It was the first honest thing anyone in my immediate family had said to me in 2 years. I did not win because my parents collapsed, begged, or publicly apologized. They didn't. People like Jonathan and Claire rarely surrender their self-image. That dramatically, they simply lost the right to define mine. Now they hear about me the way I once heard about them. Through invitations, local coverage, mutual contacts, and rooms I was not supposed to enter without their blessing. They know the house still stands. They know the work inside it matters. They know the daughter they tried to isolate answered paperwork with preparation, silence with skill, and rejection with structure. And the strangest part is that I don't want revenge anymore. I wanted that once in the rawest months when I still mistook pain for purpose. What I want now is much quieter and much more complete. I want my grandfather's lesson to stay true. A building remembers who was careful with it, and so does a life. My parents cut me off believing they were withdrawing power. What they actually did was remove the last illusion that I needed their version of love to become whole. The lawyer's envelope didn't destroy me. It introduced me to the proof that I had never been disposable, that the future they thought they could sign away had already begun without them, and that sometimes the most decisive answer to people who tried to erase you is not to shout, not to beg, and not to break, but to build something so solid their story can't survive beside it.